Okay, so I'm talking about a project that I have going on with Christina Suryenko, who is my advisor at the University of Kentucky, about wilting theory of flow polytopes. So this is a flow polytopes talk. I will start by taking your brains back in time 3 days until Tuesday, when Matthias von Bell and Eva Philippe talked about flow polytopes and DAGs and framings and DKK triangulations. I'm going to say all these words again, and you're going to remember what they mean. So a DAG is a directed acyclic graph. I've got vertices. I've got directed edges. I do not have any cycles. And I draw them so that we have one source on the left there and one sink on the right there. What is a flow on this DAG? I'm going to label my arrows, and I'm imagining I'm labeling them with how much water is flowing through them. And my rule is that at all of my internal vertices, I should have the same amount of flow coming in as there is flow coming out. So right here, I have 2 coming in and 2 coming out. That's good. That should happen at all of my internal vertices. And a flow should be unit, which means that if I sum up all the flow coming out of the source vertex, there should be 1 total flow. In this case, there is 3 total flow. This is not a unit flow. This is a strength 3 flow. But if I divided all of these numbers on the screen by 3, then this would be a unit flow. The space of unit flows gives you a flow polytope. And, well, it's kind of hard to visualize based on what I just said, but the way that my brain visualizes it is using this lemma that says that the vertices of the flow polytope are really just indicator vectors of routes. So a route is a path from the source to the sink. So if I take this one here, for example, I can put 1s at alpha 1 and beta 2, which are the arrows that I use, and 0s everywhere else, and I get a flow, which happens to be this vertex here. And this is a bijection between the vertices of my flow polytope and the routes of my framed DAG, or of my non-framed DAG. And so our flow polytope, there are four routes, which means there are 4 vertices, and they happen to make this little square in 4-dimensional space. So this is kind of flow polytope canon. Now we move to a bit of a more special case, a more recent area of study, which is framings on DAGs. So the data of a framing composed of, well, for each of my internal vertices, I want to totally order the arrows coming in. I have this one being the lowest and this one being the highest, and the arrows coming out, lowest, middle, highest. So I do this by just labeling my half edges that are next to internal vertices. I don't care about the source sink. And I don't require that these agree with each other in any way. I can kind of label almost randomly, and I'm going to get one of these. They're very easy to make, which maybe makes it surprising that they are a little bit powerful. They give you something really cool. They give you a compatibility relation on your routes. So I'm going to explain what this is using these examples on the right. So here, these 2 routes are not compatible. They are incompatible because they share this vertex here. They share this little subpath. But the blue one enters with a big number compared with the red. The blue enters with a 2 and the red with a 1. And the blue leaves with a smaller number than red. So they're kind of getting crossed up relative to each other along this vertex. The blue enters high and leaves low, and that's bad. I don't like it. Similarly, it doesn't have to just be along a vertex. Now these 2, they share this whole arrow, or it could be a path of any length, but the blue one enters with a big number and it leaves with a small number. That's bad. They are not compatible. On the other hand, they are still allowed to share subpaths, so these ones are perfectly fine. They share this arrow, but the blue one enters and leaves with bigger numbers than red, and so that's fine. So, well, this gives me a compatibility relation, and I turn this into a simplicial complex on my routes. So I say that a clique is some collection of routes, and they all have to be compatible with each other, pairwise. And so this gives me the clique complex. I care a lot about the maximal cliques in particular, and it's worth going through a little example here on my small square friend. So on the left here, Yeah, there we go. So this route here has all ones, and so this can't really ever be incompatible with anything because it can't cross anything up. It can never enter or leave with a higher number because it all has, well, lower numbers, right? So this is compatible with everything, and so is the one that always has the high number. So these are what we call exceptional routes. They're compatible with everything. The interesting thing is that the red and the blue are not compatible because they both have this vertex, but they cross each other up at that vertex. Right? The blue one enters high and leaves low relative to the red. And so if I ask about my maximal clicks, well, they're all going to have these pink exceptional routes, and in addition, one of them is going to have the blue, and one of them is going to have the red. So I have two maximal clicks here. And so I used the word powerful. I said that this was interesting and gave us something cool. I guess first I should say that the reduced picture means I am getting rid of my exceptional routes. I care about the maximal clicks, but, well, they always have all of the exceptional routes, so it's kind of useless information. I pretty up my pictures by not drawing my exceptional routes. So now what's something cool? Triangulations are cool. So my click complex, this is a theorem of Danilov, Karzanov, and Koshevoy, induces a regular unimodular triangulation on my flow polytope. And the way that we get this is we remember that routes are really vertices, right? So this route 1, 1 is really this vertex through the indicator vector 1, 1. And we also have the route 2, 2, and we have the route 2, 1. And these give me this little triangle here. And my other click gives me my red triangle. And even if I have a really big, fancy, high-dimensional flow polytope, this thing is going to work. It's going to give me a nice regular unimodular triangulation. I can use it to calculate volumes. I can calculate H star vectors with it. I can do all sorts of wonderful things with my DKK triangulation that is modeled by this nice simplicial complex of routes. And, well, now I'm going to start talking about sort of a special case, which we call amply framed DAGs. This received some attention a couple years ago. And the two things that I'm going to require from a DAG to make it amply framed is, first, all of my internal vertices should be 2 in, 2 out, so I have 2 arrows coming in and 2 arrows coming out. I don't care about the sources and sinks. And the second is that instead of being able to label my half arrows independently, I just have to label my arrows in 1 and 2. So these are, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when it comes up again later. This might seem a little bit random, but the reason I bring it up is because there's this theorem of a paper a couple years ago by a bunch of University of Kentucky authors, so Van Bell, Braun, Brugge, Hennelly, Peterson, Serienko-Yip, that we get a lattice structure on this DKK triangulation when we are amply framed. In fact, the dual graph of the DKK triangulation looks like the Hasse diagram of the lattice. This is called the framing lattice. If you remember, 3 days ago, Matthias von Bell, who was on that paper, gave a talk on his recent project, which, with Cesar Ceballos, extends this to general frame DAGs. But the literature that we are using in this paper is restricted to the amply framed case because this is what is in the literature today. So obviously, I'm not defining what this framing lattice is because, in fact, we don't need it for this project. And it is also a goal of this project to extend this framing lattice to more framed DAGs than just the amply framed case. So this is the same as the goal that Matthias talked about a little bit ago. Here's just a slightly larger example. So I've taken my friendly square and I've added another little bubble here. Now we are a friendly cube and we have 8 vertices, and our framing lattice happens to look like this. And it's a very pretty picture. So now I can finally kind of get into new things. What are we adding to this field? And we have 2 parts. I'll take them in turn. Part 1, we're going to take an amply framed DAG and we're going to avoid some of our arrows. I'm going to take a set W of arrows and they're wilted, they're bad, I can't use them, I don't like them. And here I'm wilting just this arrow here, I just chose one to start. And I get these highlighted, reduced maximal clicks here, and I call them lush because they're the ones that don't use the wilted arrow. They don't use this 2 right here, and the rest of them do. So I like these ones better. And the initial sort of observation for this project is that we always get an interval. And this is proved using algebra magic. It's the representation theory of algebras. So you get an associated gentle algebra, and you look at its torsion classes, and you do some fancy things. So this is given to us by the algebra. We get an interval. And so, of course, this is a pretty silly interval. It's got 2 elements. We can get a sillier interval by wilting both of these arrows. And in fact, there's only one of my maximal clicks here that avoids both of them, and that's this one. All of my others use one of those. So I only have one that I like, and I can get a yet sillier interval by trying to wilt, for example, these 2. Nothing avoids these 2, so I don't have any nice clicks that I like, and we're just empty, which is a little bit sad, but it is a sad interval. Now, here we can kind of get into some nice combinatorics. What can we wilt? When do we get stuff that's empty? I'm going to give a little taste with a lemma that says if I pick an exceptional route, which really just means one that only has 1s or only has 2s, so here I've highlighted this exceptional route with only 2s, then any maximal click is going to miss exactly 1 arrow of my route. And pictures are better than words. The picture is this. So we already saw that these 2 pink friends avoid the final arrow in this route, but we also have some green friends that avoid the first, and we have some blue friends that avoid the second. And so I like this picture because we get a nice decomposition of our lattice. It has some polyhedral interpretation. We're orienting over the facets that avoid the vertex corresponding to 2, 2, 2. I'm not really talking about this in this talk, but I drew that just because you can read it if you're really curious. What I am talking about in this talk is that, well, really, there I was sort of decomposing by which of those 2 arrows we avoided, but really I can pick any amply framed DAG and pick any set of exceptional routes and iterate my wilted arrows over all the ways to wilt exactly 1 arrow from each of the routes that I chose. And it's a nice theorem that we actually partition this framing lattice into lush intervals by doing this. So we'll always get a nice partition, even if we do this by multiple exceptional routes at once. It's not so bad to see that everything is in one of these intervals, but the fact that it partitions, that you don't have overlap, is quite nice. And so we already saw this picture. I could have chosen the 1 route instead, and we get a little bit of a different decomposition. But in fact, I can do them both at once, and now I'm separating everything into singletons. And the polyhedral interpretation changes a little bit. So this is an okay picture, but I can show a nicer one. I can show a Tamari picture. And this is the original motivation for this project, was decomposing the Tamari lattice into new Tamari intervals. Of course, the Tamari lattice is quite a classical combinatorial lattice. Lots of people at this conference have had interesting things to say about it. It was connected to this framing lattice story by Van Bell, Gonzalez de Leon, Mayorga Cetina, and Yip. They found a certain class of framed DAGs that give Tamari lattices with their framing lattices. And, well, we heard a little bit on Tuesday about new Tamari lattices. These are generalizations of Tamari lattices. We get nice decompositions of Tamari lattices into new Tamari lattices. And that same paper I just mentioned also connected these to DKK triangulations. And we're able to use this to get this nice theorem that I'm not going to read. I'm just going to show a picture on the next slide, which is that I can start with one of these caracal DAGs that gives me the Tamari lattice. So I have 2 copies here, and I drew 2 copies of the associated Tamari lattice. And I can choose any of these routes with only 2s, these exceptional routes that I've highlighted. And I can do my wilting decomposition. So I can group, over here I'm grouping maximal reduced clicks together when they miss the same arrows out of the ones that I've highlighted. And I'm always going to be decomposing into new Tamari intervals. So here I've shown on the screen 2 different decompositions of this Tamari lattice into intervals that look like new Tamari intervals, which is quite fun, and I think it's quite pretty. So here we get a total of 8 2 to the 3rd decompositions. The bigger we get, the more decompositions we get. And this really matches up with the feel of new Tamari lattices as they were defined. More generally, we can decompose some other framing lattice by these exceptional routes, and somehow we're generalizing those classes of lattices in the same way that new Tamari lattices are generalizing Tamari lattices, which is quite interesting. So this nice picture, or arguably 2 pictures, marks the end of what I would say is part 1 of this talk. We're starting with an amply framed DAG. We're getting nice intervals in it. We're decomposing it. Here's part 2, which is concerned with taking these lattice structures for amply framed DAGs and making them exist for more framed DAGs, more general framed DAGs. And the picture that motivates this is as follows. So I have this same Tamari lattice here, which is the framing lattice of this friend. And I've highlighted in red the interval that we get by wilting or avoiding these 2 pink arrows here. And, well, I can also consider the frame DAG that I get by just absolutely deleting those arrows. And, well, what do the clicks on this look like? They look exactly like the clicks on this that just don't use those arrows. So in other words, the DKK triangulation of this looks like the thing in red. And so even though our literature is only giving us a lattice structure for amply framed DAGs like this one is not amply framed, but we know it's an interval in the amply framed case because it's the stuff in red. So in other words, we can use this strategy to extend the class of framed DAGs which have nice lattice structures on their DKK triangulations. So what I want to do broadly is start with something like this that's not amply framed and find something like this above it that has this lush interval that looks like our original. And I'm going to do this by defining some moves on DAGs that pull us closer to being amply framed. So I have this non-amply framed example here, and well, there are a few problems. One is that, remember, amply framed DAGs need to be 2 in, 2 out. They need to have 2 arrows in, 2 arrows out at all of my internal vertices. And here I only have 1 coming in, and so I'm just going to add a wilted arrow. I'm adding this dummy arrow, and I haven't changed the complex of clicks that avoid that arrow, obviously. I've added an arrow and immediately said I can't use it. So I've not changed anything. And, well, I also have too many arrows coming out of this same internal vertex here. And I'm going to do a decontraction step. So contractions also don't affect the complex of clicks. And, well, I need to add another wilted arrow to sort of fix so that that new vertex I've decontracted is 2 in, 2 out. And now we are 2 in and 2 out everywhere, but I'm not quite amply framed because I'm not allowed to start with a 2 and end with a 1. So I'm going to replace that arrow with a 2 arrow and then a 1 arrow. And again, I want to make it 2 in, 2 out, so I'm going to fix things by adding this wilted arrow. And the final step here looks like this. I've started with my friend on the right, and I've reached my friend on the left. And in fact, if I take my framing lattice of the friend on the left, which exists because it's amply framed, and I try to avoid all of these wilted arrows in pink, then I get the DKK triangulation of the thing on the left, meaning that the thing on the left actually has a lattice structure on its DKK triangulation. So this works in this case. It can sometimes fail. What might go wrong is that the thing on the right might have too many wilted arrows. So there might not actually be any maximal clicks of the thing on the right that avoid all of the arrows that we have marked as wilted. But when it does work, we call our original DAG rooted. So this one is rooted because this worked quite nicely. And we can actually combinatorially describe when they're rooted. If the talk were 10 minutes longer, I'd talk about that. It's quite a nice description. You can read it about it in the extended abstract. But, well, we have this nice class of rooted DAGs, and they're precisely the DAGs that embed nicely as intervals, as lush intervals in our amply framed framing lattices. And because they embed nicely as intervals in amply framed, we get some immediate results about them. Our first theorem, this is the one that I've been motivating. Well, we have a lattice structure on them because they're lattice structures in an amply framed case. Wonderful. We can also get some more refined results, though. So we understand amply framed DAGs and their framing lattices a little bit better. We have some motivation coming from rep theory. One example of something like this is that we have formulas for calculating their H star vectors based on, or their H star polynomials, I should say, based on combinatorial things you can do with the lattice. I'm not going to describe these things, but suffice it to say that, well, since these rooted DAGs embed nicely as intervals in the amply framed case, we can extend this result by taking intervals. And there are some results like this. Often if you have something that is true for these amply framed DAGs, you can extend that result without too much effort to rooted DAGs by taking intervals. So this is a nice new class of framing lattices. And that is the end of my part 2. Thank you.
Are there questions?
Thank you for your talk. So one quick question is that when you're constructing an ample envelope from the original flow polytope, is that, so okay, and assuming that polytope is rooted, are they bijective? I mean, like, is it possible that, let's say, two different just rooted polytope have a same ample envelope?
Oh, certainly, yeah. So, I mean, so even here, like, I could look at this, like, I could, instead of deleting these two arrows to get this, I could delete, you know, this arrow and this arrow. In other words, these two arrows to get this, you know, interval. And, you know, the ample envelope of that would be the same thing. Does that make sense?
Then does it actually affect your theorem? I mean, what I mean by affect is that, so I guess what you're, so I guess the theorem actually talks about the amply framed DAGs and, no, never mind. I think I got it. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So maybe something with like a similar idea is that, you know, sometimes you might have choice in how you construct your ample envelope. So one rooted DAG might have multiple different ample envelopes, but in fact, like the lattice structure that you're descending to is always the same lattice. Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about your combinatorial description for rooted frame DAGs?
Yeah. So I have a secret slide for just this occasion. I like to cheat. So if you remember, exceptional routes are routes that are compatible with everything. So their numbers are kind of always highest or always lowest. More generally, you can talk about exceptional segments, which are just little segments, little paths in the DAG that are compatible with everything. And so, for example, this little green friend right here, I can't extend it without, you know, without making it incompatible with something. And so if you take any framed DAG and you draw all of these exceptional segments, what you want is for all of them to connect to the source or sink, and then it's rooted. So in this case, we're not rooted because I have this little green friend right here that does not connect to the source or sink. So this one would not work.
So following up somewhat on that, the fact that you have that guy who's not connected to the source of the sink, what does that, like, can you say why that, like, does that mean that, what kind of a problem does that cause? Is is there, does that just, the presence of that just like clearly mean that this whole thing can't work, or?
So in fact, like this process here, you'll still get the thing on the right. So you'll get an amply framed DAG, and you'll be able to take that face by zeroing out the wilted errors and get your original one. What goes wrong is the continuation of my cheat. Let's see. Yeah, so this one is an example of a non-rooted DAG. And so what goes wrong here is that I suppose maybe I should say that the exceptional segment that does not connect is like this. This is the one that prevents it from being rooted. And so what goes wrong here is that when you then extend it to an amply framed DAG, that exceptional segment now looks like this. It's turned into an exceptional route, but it starts and ends now with a wilted arrow. In fact, more generally, whenever you have an exceptional segment, what this process does is if that starts in the middle of nowhere, now it's going to start with a wilted arrow. And if it ends in the middle of nowhere, now it's going to end with a wilted arrow. And so what's happened is I have this one exceptional route with two wilted arrows, and that's a problem because no maximal click is going to be able to avoid both of those arrows at once. And so you can't be an interval in your framing lattice because your framing lattice, like all of your elements of your framing lattice, avoid only one of those arrows. And so you can still say things about this case. In fact, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be removing some elements of your framing lattice, and then you're going to be doing a lattice quotient. So you can still say things about this case. You're a rep theory person. I can say maybe rep theory-ish words. You're kind of looking at like the lower dimensional tau tilting theory or something. So not like the maximal tau rigid object. It's like the sub-maximal or something. Like you're trying to avoid too many arrows. So you can say things, but it gets messier.
Thanks for the very cool talk. This is so you can view some of these sort of kind of large posets potentially as coming from the framing lattices of these DAGs. Can you start to describe things like the chains in these posets more easily in terms of the DAGs? Like, do these help with these kinds of structural questions if you have a DAG?
I think in general, kind of the workflow that is suggested by this project is that like amply framed DAGs might be a particularly nice case because they give us rep theoretic intuition, and then rooted DAGs are kind of easy to work with from amply framed DAGs, and general framed DAGs, like maybe, like I said, you can say some things, but you know, it might be case by case. I think I'd have to get more, like I'm not sure. So ultimately, the nice thing about the amply framed case is that you can get what's called a gentle algebra, and so it becomes representation theory of algebras. Your maximal clicks are now, you know, functorially finite torsion classes, and like you have a plethora of rep theory results that you can use. But I think it's maybe a case by case basis whether or not it's useful for any given thing. Does that make sense? Like,
Thanks.
I'll ask that we take other questions offline, so after the next talk. Thank you, everybody. Let's thank the speaker.